Good evening, everybody. Can I have some eye contact and a smile? Yes, thank you. Now I can get started because now I'm energized. Good evening, my name is Adelaide Sheikh. Okay, now I see the frowns. You're thinking I'm related to the notorious. No, not at all. I don't know where the gold and the camels are and all of that. So I'm not related, but my name is Adelaide Sheikh. I'm from the center. I'm saying this because it's a long name. So it's the Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Social Economy, and you can see abbreviated CSESE. We're part of the Faculty of Management. And so I want you to feel welcome. I want to welcome the students. I want to welcome my colleagues. I want to welcome external guests that might have come in to come and listen more about what social entrepreneurship is. It's an emerging field and it's exciting. It's very exciting. So I trust that you're going to enjoy the talk. You're going to enjoy what we have to share with you. There aren't books to sell. I'll let Kerryn share later where you can buy the book. But the name of the book is The Disruptors. And I know there's a few disruptors probably in this room. And that is what attracted you here, hey? And so I trust that we will all become disruptors at some point in our lives. But the book's name is Disruptors, and the authors are Kerryn Krige and Silber. And their biographies are at the back of the book, if you do buy it. But Kerryn Krige is from Gibbs, and she is part of and heads up the Network for Social Entrepreneurs at the Gordian Institute of Business Science. And Kerryn Krige also holds a master's degree in development studies. So she's been around in the space for quite a long time. And then, quite interestingly, she was partnered with Gus in terms of authoring this book, Gus Silber. And he is a journalist, and he's authored a few books in this past few years and so forth. And we also have a guest, Krige, and I hope I'm going to say your surname correctly.
I'm going to challenge you.
Makoma.
Makoma.
Oh, mwah, mwah. Thank you for being so kind about me saying your surname. And Gregory is one of the disruptors in the book. And we want to hear his story. Fantastic story. And yeah, he's a man of rhythm and movement. So if any of us want to get some of that action, we should speak to him after. So I'm going to be seated now and just start off with the questions. Can everybody hear me? I don't see any response. Am I too low now? Should I stand? Am I fine? Okay, great. So thank you so much for coming, and congratulations for this book. You know, social entrepreneurship in South Africa is an emerging field of study. And I think Kerryn Krige, in her position at Gibbs and a few others in academic spaces, is really trying to get this out there now. And I'm very proud of this book. I'm glad that some of the stories have been written now. So if you want to tell us why the book, why did you decide to have this book written up?
Well, thanks, Adelaide. And evening, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So the mystery question is always why? And I suppose I put that back out to the floor. Does anybody here know exactly what social entrepreneurship is? You put up your hands. There's the why. I was sitting, when people always ask me what is it that I do, and I head up this network for social entrepreneurs at Gibbs, and you know when your friends get that glazed look in their eye and suddenly you realize people aren't phoning you anymore, or they're not actually asking you what you do anymore, or they suddenly start distancing themselves from you and disappearing into the ether. I suddenly realized that I was working in a space which I feel very strongly about, and as Adelaide said, there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of movement around social entrepreneurship, but nobody actually really knows what it is. And because people don't know what it is, there's an assumption that it's not happening in South Africa, that it is something that is, you know, the preserve of the UK and the US and countries that tend to have quite an elitist approach to life. And so the book was very much an opportunity for us to profile social entrepreneurs, and to really look at the scope of social entrepreneurs that exist in the country, and also start giving us the information that we need to be able to answer what is social entrepreneurship. We know very much why social entrepreneurship is important, and I'm sure we'll unpack that. We look at our inequality, we look at our unemployment statistics, we look at this massive disconnect that exists in our society that has earned us the title of protest capital of the world. And social entrepreneurship is really this opportunity for us to integrate values to business and values to government so that we can actually really connect the three spheres of society. So the why of the book started off as quite a personal thing for me in terms of wanting to be popular and my friends not moving and disappearing from me. But I really think it has answered or has given the grounding or the foundation for us to be able to answer some very critical questions as to what does social entrepreneurship look like in South Africa, and certainly to dispel the myth that it doesn't exist in South Africa. And when you hear stories from Greg and the journey that he's been on, you'll see exactly why it is such an important model for us to follow.
Just leading on that, Kerryn, I know that you've tried to expand on what it is. If you can just, for the academic folk here, give us some sort of definition of what a social entrepreneur is, and leaning towards what social enterprise is all about.
So here's the million-dollar question. So the wonderful thing about being in a university is that we're in a place where we're encouraged to disagree. So please completely disagree with me. This is my view, and it is not one that is completely set in stone. I think social entrepreneurship in South Africa is something that is evolving as we learn and understand it more. But social enterprises are essentially organizations that have first a social mission, and they deliver their social mission by generating a profit. So we have completely moved away from charity, which relies on grant funding to generate the social value that it returns to South Africa, to society. And on the other side of the spectrum, because the easiest way to understand social entrepreneurship and where it sits is on a spectrum where on one side you have charity or traditional nonprofits, and on the other end you have classic for-profits, which generate profit, as we know, but for a self-interest. The business is not really there to add value to society, it is there to make a profit so that it can continue to benefit. And as we know in our society, these two poles have been pushing further and further apart. Our civil society has become disconnected from being the voice of the people, and we see that when we look at events like Marikana. And on the other side of the spectrum, we see business operating too far in this, on the side of self-interest and profit. And in the middle sits this very beautiful space called social enterprise, which blends the social values that the charity sector brings to the conversation and the for-profit value and the sustainability that comes with generating for-profit that business brings into the conversation. The great thing about this is that it connects these two very important words called impact and income. And once you connect those two, you start moving away from the patronizing approach that charity has. I give you, I don't ask you what you want, I give. And that's the impact. But the income means that if that person doesn't want your service, if they don't think what you're giving them is good enough, they're not going to pay for it. So you start seeing a very natural, very easy alliance that is culturally quite foreign to us that exists between impact and income. And that is really at the heart of what social entrepreneurship is about. As you can tell, there's reasons why friends would start moving away because I don't have the answer in a sentence. But I hope that gives you some sense of what the nuance and understanding and the concept of social entrepreneurship is in the South African context.
Thank you. Now, Gaston yourself has taken a specific approach in trying to get this book sort of on bookshelves. And so I'm going to give Gus an opportunity to tell us his experience in terms of trying to narrow down to the few social entrepreneurs that he has profiled in this book. And sort of also, can you give us a bit of a why as well?
Okay, so from my side, and thanks everyone for being here, what interests me about these social entrepreneurs, and there's a total of 14 in the book and another 4 in an ebook, so a total of 18 social entrepreneurs, men, women from across the country, from all the provinces, or as many as we could find. What interested me about their stories, firstly, I think they're great South African stories. And I think South Africa needs entrepreneurs, and particularly we need social entrepreneurs who can create employment, can make a difference in society. And I think what struck me about these men and women in the book, people ask, what do they have in common? What makes them all social entrepreneurs? I think firstly, I think they're all kind of a little bit crazy. And I think maybe Gregory would agree with me. It's not an easy thing to be in any kind of business. And it's specifically not easy to be a successful entrepreneur. And a social entrepreneur is even harder. But Gregory's background is growing up in Soweto and loving dance, and eventually kind of turning his dance into a passion and into a social enterprise. And so, in other words, what these entrepreneurs also have in common very often is that they turn their passion, their interest in society into an enterprise that makes a difference, and inspires other people, hopefully, along the way. And I think the reason that we chose the Disruptors for the title is that it's important for people actually to disrupt our society in a positive way. Disruption is, I think, a very positive force. It's kind of upsetting the status quo, doing things a little bit differently. And I think that's another thing all these entrepreneurs have in common. They all kind of come at problems from a very unusual angle, and odd kind of solutions that they come up with. So some of the entrepreneurs in the book are classical inventors. They come up with products that no one thought of before. Others are just people who, in the field of education, healthcare, the arts, come up with interesting and unusual ways to promote their fields of interest. So what interested me as a journalist was being able to share and to tell their stories. And they're all stories of obstacles and failure and then success and then more failure. So what struck me about them is that they're very human stories, and that at the end of it, some sort of success emerges and some sort of inspiration. But key to them all, I think, is that they disrupt things. They go in and they kind of cause chaos, and at the end, something positive comes out of it. That's what grabbed me about these entrepreneurs.
Chaos is a key word here, hey? So the way your book has been put together, it has 4 parts, and the first part looks at insight to the power and possibility of the social entrepreneurs, as noted in your book. And really, in the first part, it looks at what makes an entrepreneur different. And then the second section of the book looks at the character traits of each social entrepreneur. And here you really zoom into how they view the world, what is their worldview, and how what they perceive it to be, and how they find the solutions in these respective areas that they focus on. And then the third section, you look at the innovation. How are they doing things differently? And the fourth part is the academic insight. So between yourself and Kerryn, if you can maybe just expand a little bit more on that approach and give us a few examples of the entrepreneurs that you used in the book or wrote up about or profiled.
Okay, I'll start with a couple. I was talking about inventors a little bit earlier, and there's a guy who grew up in Limpopo, a guy by the name of Ludwig Marishani, and he was sitting with his friend in the sun one day, and they were talking about it was kind of one of these lazy, sunny days in Limpopo, and his friend said they got onto the subject of bathing for one reason or another, and his friend said, wouldn't it be great if you never had to actually take a bath, if there was just something you could do? And Ludwig was struck by this. What a fantastic idea. And highly enterprising young guy. He went and he researched on his cell phone lotions to see if it was possible, and he came up with a thing called dry bath, which is one of the great South African inventions. And he struck me, and just a young guy with a kind of desire to make money. I mean, absolutely unashamedly, his ambition was to change the world and to be a billionaire by the age of 25. So his goal was to make money for himself and in some way to be an agent of change. But the product that he came up with is very much a social product that can make a difference in people's lives. So people who don't have water or access to running water can use dry bath. And of course, people around the world, there are so many applications for this product. So it's a great product born out of necessity from a continent that has a lot of social problems for instance, a lack of water. So he was one guy. Then I'll just say one more. Young girl, Claire Reed. That's right. Claire Reed, yes. At the age of 16, she started a social enterprise. So you find very often at a young age, the seed for the social enterprise blooms. In her case, it was quite literally a seed. She started planting seeds in her garden at home, just as a kind of sideline, make a vegetable garden. It's a nice thing to do. And she was frustrated by how difficult the process was. So working together with her domestic worker, they came up with a solution of planting seeds in a strip using newspaper. And that has turned into a very successful enterprise as well. So a small idea takes root. And for a lot of people, if you can't fix the problem, you forget about it. But the kind of person who becomes a social entrepreneur, it nags them. And it kind of obsesses them, and it takes over their life. And eventually, in the case of Penn, in the case of Ludwig, and a lot of other entrepreneurs in the book, it turns into a business through a lot of trial and error. So those were the two that kind of struck me. But as I say, all 14 are very interesting stories to tell. And maybe Kerryn can share a couple more. Thank you. You've got your mic.
So the book was structured after we'd written all the stories, because we started to see these themes coming through around the craziness of the characters, and we realized we couldn't title a book Crazy, but also around these stories that got them started and the characteristics that they shared, which obviously goes beyond crazy, but an extraordinary resilience and a deep belief in what it is that they do, framed by experience, but also just exposure and the way that they see the world. I do believe our social entrepreneurs frame the world very positively, and they're very committed to seeing how they can achieve progression. And what we saw towards the end of the book, we actually plotted them on a spectrum of social entrepreneurship to see where they sit. And they range from being quite close to charity organizations, like folk like Sharonjeet Shan, who runs a math center down the road, through to folk who are controversially called social entrepreneurs, like Jonathan Liebman, who did Mabaneng. But also what was interesting is we tried to find social entrepreneurs outside of the urban centers of Gauteng and the Western Cape. In fact, we pretty much avoided the Western Cape. And there's so much to be explored outside of the urban bubble of Joburg, where I think social entrepreneurship is happening intrinsically and is an inherent part of our culture. So the next step, and when we plan book 2, once we've just recovered from book 1, is to really look at how do we draw folk in from outside of our bubble, because here it's happening. Here are the talks and the discussions about social entrepreneurship. You can disagree with me, you can go watch Greg, you expose to the principles of social entrepreneurship, but just step a few kilometers outside of the city bubble, and it's a very different story. And that's where it's happening, because what I regard our social entrepreneurs as is super entrepreneurs. These are people who operate completely at the frontier, and always in environments of deep constraint. They're the folk who make things work in townships, in squatter camps, in very rural villages. And if they can make business and social change work where they are, they hold extraordinary knowledge and extraordinary power. And I think it's very important for us to find them, identify them, so that we can learn from them, because people who can operate in constraints, they're extraordinary and they deserve to be celebrated.
Thank you so much. The characters in your book they're really phenomenal, because if you look at some of the entrepreneurs that were profiled, there's an entrepreneur that takes care of people's wellness. What is it? Eyesight. What does he do? Oh, he's an optometrist. Sorry, he's an optometrist. You find the lady that does
got like
the
2
seed.
doctorates. He's just off the chart.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. And then you find Pat Pillay. He was a previous news anchor, but he also decided that he was done with news reading, and he's now a full-time social entrepreneur. So you can really come from any sector. You can really use your expertise from any area. And you can also just take basic life skills and turn that into something phenomenal that people need in rural settings. But I want to give Gregory an opportunity to tell us about his craziness, since you've been labeled slightly crazy, and how how it is that you then decided to become a social entrepreneur, to use your talent and then transform yourself into an entrepreneur and more so a social entrepreneur.
Thank you. Thank you to Kerryn and Gus for obviously compiling, I think, one of the areas which is really the art into a social enterprise space, because it's really one of the forms that, for me, it's undervalued quite a lot. And I think I was so excited yesterday that the SABC gave credibility to the artists in the country by allowing them to reclaim their space, in radio, and hopefully that will also filter through to television. So those are the challenges I think we are facing as a country, and especially in my field. I'm a dancer, I'm a choreographer, but also today I can call myself a social entrepreneur, because my aim was always about changing the landscape. And before I delve into my history, which informs really the decisions that I've made to be where I am today, I just want to ask one question to all of you in the room. How many of you are students here? And how many of you have been to the theater, which is right next to you? Yeah, do you see? So part of my work, really to enter into a space of social enterprise, was to change the perception of how we see the arts, and also how we operate within the artistic space. So when I created the company in 1999, so the company is 17 years old now. When I created it, it was with a notion of really looking at South Africa from the outside. I was in Belgium at that time studying at the Performing Arts Research and Training Studios in Brussels. And I was looking at South Africa from the outside, and I wanted to be part of the changing political landscape, and also to be part of the changing artistic landscape. So I came back after 1 year. It was a 3-year course, but I did 1 year because I was basically told that, everything that you have here, it cannot be matched to what the European standards can actually offer you. So that gave me really confidence in terms of the fact that we come really from difficult circumstances, but we can overcome quite a lot in terms of already what we have historically, that we inherit already from our grandparents. And I grew up watching dance. I grew up quite close to a hostel where over the weekends I'll go there and watch migrant laborers who were performing their own traditional forms. So somehow this was self-taught in terms of me tapping into learning and really pursuing the interest in terms of the culture and tradition as important facets of my being. At the same time, I was introduced to the modern forms of dance through the medium of television, because then I saw Michael Jackson coming on our television screen. We had a black and white one at that time, which was really small. And at that time I said, it's possible. Here's a black man who's transforming the landscape around the world. Globally, he was a phenomenon because he was able to take something that was really seen as a form of entertainment and created really an inspiration for many other young people like myself to really look at it in terms of a form that can create some form of change and create revenue. So I'm going to jump. When I created the company, we created as a non-profit organization. So really, in terms of the language, we're not using social enterprise. We're not using the words like profits. They were not part of the the formation of the company. We were really looking at a company that was creating opportunities for dancers to be trained, opportunities for me to be able to be mad and to be crazy in terms of my own dreams and aspirations, and folding them and creating choreographies. But I also realized that these choreographies themselves were a product, because a lot of people internationally were starting to buy into the product, and we're starting to export the product. So it was going outside of the country, even though inside the country it was still undervalued. But internationally, it was really gaining a lot of momentum and support. And so we were getting paid in euros, thanks God for that time, because that kept us going. But it was not enough, because in every part of the business, you always have to think ahead. You need to strategize, you need to come up with principles that will allow sustainability to take control of your institution or your craft. And we were not thinking of those things. So down the line, I realized that we needed to change and to transform the way we were operating as an organization. The first thing I did, because the NPO requires you to have a board, and the board that I had at that time was really a board made up of my friends. So I was basically telling them what to do, and they were not questioning anything. So it was business as usual. And I realized that I needed a very strong board that was going to take also the governance of the organization very seriously, but also for them to know that the minute they sign up to be board members within the organization, that they understand their role, and their role was that they oversee the governance of the organization. And also they are there to play an important role of ensuring that strategies are really implemented in a proper manner. So yeah, it was great. We changed the board. We had a new board which was made up of new people that I never came across before. And these were people from the corporate sector. We have a doctor who's really a second in charge of Chamber of Mines, who sits in our board. We have 2 CAs who sits also in our board. We also have a lawyer now who's also now sitting in our board. So all these people come with their expertise in terms of the vision for the company moving forward, and also to drive ourselves from really carrying this begging bowl and depending on grants. So we needed to change that face of grant dependence. So we had to transform the way we were thinking and see ourselves as a business, because we were offering a service and we had a product that was really important, and that was sellable. And it's a product that is when packaged properly, can really take us far. And so we focus really on the product itself, which is also at this point in time, we're diversifying the product itself. What else can it do as a product? So at the moment, we are collaborating with a lot of musicians, and we're talking to Gallo in terms of licensing, because we actually are the custodians of the music that is produced by the musicians that we work with. So we have also extended that product to make even more revenue, to create more revenue to the organization. The vision has not changed. We have a very strong outreach and development program that we're still doing. When we're looking for dancers, we go to the most rural of places in the country, and that's where we source our talent. And most of our dancers, 90% of our dancers, really come from they're outside of Gauteng, which really is also something that is great, because also they bring with themselves something special that we cannot find within the region itself. And so they add into into the product itself. So they continue to change and innovate the product itself. I think I'm going to stop there.
Otherwise, I was going to try and stop you by
Yes.
winking at you or something. I love the way that they describe you in the book here. They say that you're a man who dances for joy. So I'm sure that must have energized you. But if you want to give some advice to some of the young people in the room that also have a dream like you had a dream, and it is not traditional business, and they know that they're going to end up on that spectrum that Kerryn was referring to, where they're going to have a strong social intent, what are the two things that you would say kept you going as a social entrepreneur in the South African sort of business environment that has a lot of barriers to entry? What is the two things that kept you going?
Two things that keeps me going, I think. One is definitely looking for opportunities within my creative space. And secondly is not to be afraid to try new things. I think for me, those two things are my driving force. I wake up every morning and I'm thinking, what else is there, and how can I?
What else and how can I? Thank you very much, Gregory. Kerryn, I want us to just zoom in a little bit more now to sort of the national landscape we have for social entrepreneurship and the opportunities that probably lie on the horizon. But I also want you to maybe explain some of the challenges on a national level that social entrepreneurs are facing at the moment, and what are some of the things that even that come through in the book that the social entrepreneurs have done to overcome some of those challenges, because South Africa is a very complex place to do business at this point.
So, where do I start? Who defines themselves as crazy in this room? Who feels that they've got that slightly weird edge? People don't listen to you. Hands up. Good. And who is very confident that then when you leave university, you're just going to sail straight into the career of your choice? Do you have that confidence? Hands up. Our hands are getting less and less, so our questions become more and more technical. And I think that defines the national landscape pretty well. The employment statistics came out yesterday, and there was all shock horror. They've gone up by 1%, but they shock horror whichever way you look at it. They've gone from 25 to 26%. And that unemployment rate, I'm afraid, sits largely in this room. That we're a youth bubble country. The majority of our population is young people under the age of 35, and the majority of those folk can't find an entry point into formal employment. And we cannot continue to think that the system can sustain us. We cannot keep thinking that we're going to cruise into a job in a corporate and, retire at 65 and get a house and a beam and whatever else is on your list of things that you want. We've got to change. And we know that we've got to change. And I think students know more than anybody that the system needs to change. And we've been seeing that in the voice of students over the past couple of months in the country. The national context in South Africa cannot continue. The system cannot continue the way it is. And so what all social entrepreneurship is a model. It's not the only model, but it is a model that allows us to look at, well, how do you encourage people to spot opportunity, not in how many tubes of toothpaste do I need to make $1 million, but actually the opportunity exists all around us in the social change and in the society that we want to create. Because what social entrepreneurship does is it shows us that you can generate income by seeing opportunity in a way that is not framed by profit. And that is a very, very important distinction. That when you leave university, you're not always thinking, well, how do I make the most amount of money? But actually framing the way you perceive opportunity as being, well, what can I do to improve South Africa? And don't be fooled if you think social entrepreneurs are all small charity types who, have lots of cats. That's not the case at all. And I think Greg proves that beautifully. But they run anything and everything from multi-million rand, multi-country empires, to use a big word, to small, what would be considered small centers in very rural parts of the country, but that deliver essential services and generate substantive income. So this is not a feel-good philosophy. This is a critical philosophy in South Africa's context. If we want to address our inequality, which I'm sure you all know about, those unemployment statistics, and if we really want to transform the sluggish environment that we find ourselves in, where we're just bombarded with news that is framed in a negative way, and an economy that is not growing. And what social entrepreneurship does is it blends that conversation by introducing values and economy, and you get the two together. Just very quickly, because I know you're not in a classroom, but there's a lovely thing called the Global Competitiveness Index. Google it, it's produced by the World Economic Forum. And South Africa scores #1 in the world for beautiful things in the economic sphere. Governance, protection of minority, shareholder rights, our accountability, our auditing standards. Literally, we're there, #1 in the world, #2 in the world, #3 in the world. You want to cheer when you see things like this. And then when you look at the other indicators for South Africa, the social indicators are abysmal. Shocking education statistics that have us at 140 out of 144 countries, the business impact of HIV and TB, labor business relationships, all in the bottom ranks of this index. Now, I'm not saying this to get us depressed about the good and the bad. I'm saying what South Africa has done very well is it's strengthened its economic institutions, and they are world class. But it's done that without being able to pull its society along with it. And we cannot continue to strengthen our economic institutions if we don't strengthen our society. And what social entrepreneurship does is you strengthen both together. And it's the only way to fast track social and economic change in SA.
Thank you so much. The way this book has been put together is actually quite practical. What you find is obviously the profiling of each social entrepreneur, and all very different. But what I like about it, it also has a global perspective that was written up by Richter's business school, an international business school by Jeffrey Robertson and Brett Gilbert. And it has some key indicators here that it says a social enterprise or entrepreneurship should have, which is its people, social impact, the process of entrepreneurship, social innovation, financial stability. And then it also looks at measurement. You know, many times in social enterprise, we do all the good things, but there is no measurement, and we never think about the future. So I want Kerryn just to maybe summarize what the global perspective was by these two individuals, that the academics that actually wrote up the global perspective on it.
So it's very nerve-wracking getting in touch with an American university, and especially when they're in New York, because it's kind of, you know. And what I love about JR and Brett is that they, from the start, were like, absolutely, we're getting involved. And I was like, nervously biting my nails, thinking about the dollar exchange rate, going, and your fee? And they're like, absolutely no fee whatsoever. They never underestimate South Africa and the rich context that we live in, and the opportunities for learning and thinking and contextualizing that we have here. And I think really the spirit that Rutgers University embraced working with us on the book says everything, because they really see the context for social entrepreneurship in South Africa as extremely rich and the opportunities as deeply rewarding. And I think, and I'm reading between the lines here, but more so than in their own countries where they've regulated social entrepreneurship. I didn't answer your one question as to what are the barriers, and one of the barriers to SE is regulation. In that, we're talking about something that's not a form. There's no business form that you can register that as a social enterprise. So Greg, as an example, explained to you that he has to register as a not-for-profit and a for-profit organization so that he can run and receive funds from both ends of the spectrum. So just very quickly, I feel deep. It's very rewarding to know that we don't operate in isolation, and that there's deep support for the work that we do and deep understanding of the context in South Africa.
Before I open the floor to questions, I just want to ask Gus, you were at the coalface now for a while with the social entrepreneurs, and you probably got a good sense of where they're at and how they are doing, you know, sort of the litmus test of social entrepreneurs. Can you maybe give us your own view on the future for social entrepreneurs. Do you think that there definitely is a space for this, for it increasing, growing, or do you find that people are becoming despondent when it comes to the space of going into social entrepreneurship?
Well, as Kerryn was suggesting earlier on, I think one thing that characterizes South Africa as a nation is resilience. So anyone who kind of stays here, anyone who aspires to make a living here, anyone who aspires to make a difference here, has got a built-in resilience and a kind of determination to kind of pursue their goals regardless of how difficult it is politically, socially, economically, in every other way. I think one thing that struck me also about the stories of these social entrepreneurs is how few of them are actually driven by money. They certainly kind of need to make money to make their enterprises work, but for most of them, money comes almost as a kind of spin-off of the good work that they do. I mentioned the story of Ludwig, a young guy who very definitely wanted to be a billionaire. So he's an exception. But for most of it, it's the drive to actually kind of do something, and that drive to make a social impact that allows him to create a business that kind of organically grows and then in the end actually does make money and does make a difference to the lives of people. But unlike a lot of what we call classical or traditional entrepreneurs, the goal at the outset is not, I want to make a fortune, I want to make a huge amount of money. It's rather, I'm here, I want to make a difference, and if I make money out of it, that's great. That seems to me to be the big motive that sets these entrepreneurs apart.
Thank you so much. Are you ready for questions? Can I open up the floor for some questions? Maybe we can take 3 at a time. What I'd like you to do is to stand, just introduce yourself, and then project your voice when you are actually asking the question. Or is there a roaming mic we can use?